25 years, both in the classroom and in the field, coordinating field experiences for students. I have worked both as an English teacher for middle and high and as an art teacher, and now I'm the experiential education teacher leader.
Thanks, Katie. And Jessie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Robinson. I'm the Director of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. I've been in education for 24 years. Started out as a math teacher and then was a school leader before taking this role about 5 or 6 years ago.
Great. So these are educators, obviously, with a ton of experience in the classroom, many district statewide teachers of the year here. And we're also going to be joined by Fiona. I don't know, has anyone been in touch with Fiona? I think you're muted, Brooke, but I think you said you'll get in touch with her. I'll
text her.
So just quickly, so you know, when Fiona hops on, she's our social studies teacher leader and our Wabanaki studies coordinator. She also founded the race course that's part of the PEA course offerings for educators, along with, it was Julia Hazel, right? They co-founded it at the time. And she's been an ELL teacher in the district, as well as, what was she teaching in middle school, everyone? Was she social studies over?
I think social studies. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a powerhouse of amazing, dedicated educators. So we're really, really excited. And this has been a huge focus of ours, is to create structures to elevate our super talented and experienced educators to kind of pull out of the classroom and work with their colleagues side by side to move this work along with folks like Gail and Jessie and myself. So I am going to share my screen now. Any updates, Aura, about if people are joining us?
I did hear Nylette will be hopping on shortly. And I think Sarah's just finishing up another meeting, so we'll join. But yeah, I would say we should just dig in.
And I haven't heard back from Fiona yet, but hopefully she's on her way.
Okay, great. Great. So as far as our goals for this evening, you know, I hope that for folks who aren't here on the board, they can watch later, because this is really, this team put some time into trying to build some context for you all. Specifically, we're working to build shared understanding around curriculum and professional development resource investment. And as we say, kind of that underlying theory of action behind what we're doing system-wide. And then we want to preview some of the potential FY24 investments. And in so doing, our aim is to grow collective commitment to maintaining the programming opportunities that have been built, and to helping figure out how we can resource the next stage of evolution as we keep working to realize our Portland Promise goals. So there's no resolution or policy or action. This is really in terms of the board's domain, the budget domain of your 3 kind of responsibilities, and acknowledging that, you know, there's a ton of context you need to have in order to understand and sort of weigh in and make decisions. And so that's what we're trying to spend some time helping you do tonight. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of historical context. So I think, you know, Mickey has been with the committee for a while, so she's got some of this background. We've done stuff like this with curriculum committee annually, and it's really shifted folks' understanding and ability to contextualize things that they're hearing about. So I don't think, though, I mean, obviously, Julianne, I know you're new to the board, or I'm not sure that this has been something you've gotten as much deep connection to from policy or from committee work. So just a little bit of context here. So when we, design and launch the Portland Promise Plan, at that time, a big thing we were observing was that we had pockets of excellence. That was a kind of a phrase we said a lot. So amazing educators across the system, but really no coherent district-wide strategy in terms of curriculum and instruction. And so lots of times either parents or kids would tell us that their experience depended on which school and which teacher they happened to have. Really, literally, sometimes what they learned depended on the school and the teacher. And so we were noticing that, along with the fact that we had all this brilliance to sort of uplift, and how do we do that? In that context, there was not an articulated instructional vision at the district. There was no district-wide scope and sequence in terms of the learning progression. Real limited assessment coherence. So there was a ton of assessments at the elementary level and not much shared assessment at the secondary level. And when we started the Portland Promise, the entire budget in the district's budget for curriculum was $75,000, all grades, all content areas. So our entire curricular investment, and that's like in terms of the tools we're providing teachers with, amounted to $75,000, K through 12, all content areas. And then finally, just the academic team structure had sort of ebbed and flowed depending on leadership and budget. I think at the time there had been, I think that I was the 5th or 6th in my position that changed over annually for 5 or 6 years. So there just wasn't a ton of coherence, and there was almost no content area expertise on the team. And so that's kind of where we started, at least as I situate us in relationship to the Portland Promise. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that came before that, as you can see that you've got veteran educators on the call here. So in terms of given that some of the big moves we were trying to make and that we're kind of still continuing to shift toward our first, really this recognition that we needed a shared instructional vision in order to guide decisions about what tools and curriculum materials we needed, what kind of professional development we needed, what systems and structures needed to change. And so there was a big effort to articulate a shared instructional vision that really created that coherence across the system. So centering the student as they progress across multiple schools in their career in our system. And the sort of approach and orientation, I think Brick, you'll share a little bit about an example of this, but was to really ground the instructional vision in research and best practice, the insight and wisdom of our very talented teachers, and to integrate our equity orientation and goals throughout the pedagogical vision around instruction. So that was a big kind of emphasis and orientation, kind of given where we were starting from. And then another piece was really around teacher leadership. And so like I mentioned, you see the people on this call, all of us have been teachers, of course, but then multiple people here, still teachers on the contract. So we've created multiple structures to pull together and lift up teacher voice to help inform this work. So vertical teams. And Brooke, are you going to talk a little bit about an example of that? Is that right? Or should I give a general explanation?
I wasn't going to, but I can.
I can speak to it a little, and then you can elaborate if it makes sense when we get to your slide. But vertical teams are groups of people, groups of folks across every grade span and building who are teachers, mostly teachers, but then also some administrators, and in some cases, students and parents and community members who come together around a content area. Who start by articulating what's our current state, like looking at our data and what's happening to sort of trace the trajectory of a student's learning experience, and then to articulate this vision that's grounded in research and best practice. And then ultimately, these teams of people make recommendations around things like curriculum, professional development needs, and structural shifts. So the vertical teams were created, and we have later, Jesse will summarize all the teams that we have. We created these full release teacher positions on our academic team, many of whom you're meeting today. And then there's multiple others. These are just a couple that intersect with the curriculum and instruction work, which is a equity leaders structure that we built into all the buildings and the school leadership teams. So that's been a big focus in terms of how do we move this work forward together coherently as a district rather than sort of in pockets of schools or classrooms. Another big emphasis has been around really resourcing high quality instructional materials. So that comment about, starting with $75,000 as our total district-wide investment. We've been making an effort to provide educators with the best in class, high quality instructional materials that are grounded in current research. And then really moving toward embedded professional development. And Priya will talk about this more in a little bit, but just thinking of how do we not do these like big one and done random district PDs when we're trying to move work together, but thinking more about how adults learn best, which is embed in their day-to-day work ongoing in terms of an arc of learning. So our emphasis has really been around educators who are in these coaching positions working side by side, and then always providing ongoing professional development with any kind of new tools that we're adopting. And so this, Erin did post this on the board docs, but these are the instructional visions. So we have this overarching one, and then we have content specific. Jessie had a little accident, so she was going to speak to this, but I don't know. Jessie, do you want to say anything else here?
No, I can. So this is just a little bit more detail about the instructional visions that Malia was talking about. We have an overarching instructional vision, which really kind of guides, what are we looking for? What do we want our instruction to look like? What do we value in terms of our instruction? So that has things like inclusive classroom environment, where all students feel like they're part of the community, cultural responsiveness, where students can bring their own identities and feel validated, and also learn about other people's identities. And high expectations, where we, believe all students can be successful. So that's kind of the overarching instructional vision. And then there are these content-based instructional visions, again, with like the center is around equity, but how, what does a math class look like? What is great. So when you think of how you were taught as a math student, oftentimes it's like the teacher teaches you how to think, and then you kind of do the problem exactly the way that they taught you how to do it, and then you spit it back out. But this really kind of explains how math is taught in a way that where students bring their own knowledge and thinking to the classroom, and they share with each other, and they make mistakes and they play together. It's a real shift in terms of how we teach math. So it's a real, kind of outlines what that vision looks like. And this was developed, like Malia said, with teachers and coaches and administrators, real collaborative approach over years. It's grounded in best practice. So we did a lot of research about what are best practices around teaching math in a way that all students can be successful. And then, this is kind of really what guides our decision-making around program related to math. So what kinds of things do we do around professional development in terms of coaching, or what are the materials that we use for curriculum?
Great.
So there are a lot of them, and they all together kind of, it's really cool to see how there are all these links for all of them in that overarching vision. There's so many connections to that overarching vision.
Great.
Malia, could I just ask for a second? Thank you, Jessie, for that. Do these things live somewhere? Like if we did want to look at, the vision of the different subjects further? Or?
Yeah, if you go into our website and you go through academics, you'll be able to see, for all the content areas, the different pages, and then that will give you the vision as well as other information like the standards and when they get taught, things like that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we want to have pausing to ask questions. I know Nylet just joined. So Julianne and Nylet and Emily, just feel free to, if you have any,
Yeah, I was thinking, or if it's okay, there's one more slide here of the big picture context, then I thought we'd pause, and then we have each teacher leader is going to sort of highlight a piece of the work, if that's okay.
Yep.
Awesome. So Jessie, did you want to speak to this, or did you want me to?
That one's you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So then this is something that may or may not be familiar to board members. We've talked about our annual priorities with you all each year, but just to kind of help you sort of see the connection. So obviously, the Portland Promise. We think now about these big priorities that integrate achievement and equity, whole student equity, and people at equity. So our achievement and equity priority right now is around strengthening what we call as educators tier 1 or core instruction. And so this has been our priority focus within the achievement and equity realm for several years now. And we really think about this theory of action that if all students get exposed to great, relevant, engaging grade level learning with the appropriate supports and scaffolds, they're more likely to master grade level content. And sort of the inverse is true. If they're never exposed to grade level learning because they're pulled out or aside or taught something different or the tasks don't align, then they're never going to learn on grade level. And so really just, I think what we saw when we got here was there was a lot of interest in intervention, but it was like happening without a clear, coherent instructional core in terms of that tier one. And frankly, like a lot of the feedback I got was from special ed and ELL educators who would say, everyone's like talking about pulling our kids out and like filling gaps and deficits, but like, what's actually happening in the core instruction that is designed in a way that all kids are kind of getting access to that core instruction. So we've really been, and again, with that resource investment being so minimal, trying to shore that up. And that's been our focus. So it's been around, in terms of strengthening core instruction, the materials in terms of curriculum, the professional development, and then those systems and structures. Like one thing we've talked about is detracking as an example. So I'm happy to pause here, Aura, to your point, and just see if folks have questions before then we hear from all the teacher leaders about some of the specifics.
Oh, Julianne, go ahead.
I was wondering on the vertical teams, do they go through all schools, or is there a pattern where a student might go from elementary to middle to high school in a general flow, high school being up in the air? But are there any schools that do not have representation on those?
Yeah, great question, Julianne. In every case, we are striving for representation from all of our schools. We actually have a spreadsheet where we track that and make it transparent to administrators so that it's very clear who they have on each team. It also helps us look at, there's some people that are really drawn to this kind of work, and we're trying to be aware of like, oh, so-and-so's on 4 vertical teams as the representative. So we're really trying to make sure there's diverse kind of perspectives and opportunities and not overwhelming any educator. I think Fiona will talk a little bit later about an example of that with social studies that I think will kind of help with that as well, Julianne. Go. Oh, sorry.
The other question I had to do with, from what I've been listening and hearing, I know in some elementary schools, or at least one elementary school that I went to, they do have an ELL teacher that is paired with a couple grade level teachers, so that you can have more of that inclusion, which you should have, which is language learning and all that sort of part. When is there actual intense instruction for language acquisition?
For the students or for professional development?
For students.
Yeah. So one of the big, so in your example was at the elementary level, I heard. So one of the big things we've focused on is the schedule that would enable the appropriate amount of time for that English instruction. And so we have, through our LAU plan, specific, guidelines, right, about depending on the language level through the access assessment, how much, language instruction students are supposed to get. And so one of the things we observed is that because of the schedule, there were times where students were getting pulled out of grade level instruction to get their time with their ESOL teacher, for example. So it's like, they were constantly going to be behind because they were pulled out, not learning that. So that's been a huge focus that we've been working on with principals, and they've been super committed to trying to figure that out so that we have in the schedule now, a big move we made is to collectively build a schedule that has the core instruction time with the acceleration or remediation block, where people are trying to organize those types of supports that you're mentioning, Julianne. That is not to say that that's working perfectly, right? Because there's a lot of variables, as you might imagine, and you would know this as an educator, that go into like how that actually pans out. But that's how we've been thinking about it and working on it.
Okay,
and then there's the sheltered instruction in place as well. So we'll have, in the case where we have the possibility, co-planning happening with the EL teacher and the classroom teacher, and then they might push in. And so during the time when students are doing independent work, they might kind of pull that group to work with them in that context as well. So that's happening as well.
Have you considered extended day?
Yeah, I mean, in some of our, and Gail, you could speak to this. Some of our schools have different kind of after school extended day programs. I mean, this team would say we need more time in the day. We've been looking at models when we were looking at that schedule, and some of the best practice models we were looking at nationally, we're like scratching our heads. We're like, how do they get all this? And we're like, oh, all these states have an additional hour in the day. So you know that gets into the whole contract. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
Time.
Second one with a question. Oh, thanks, Jillian.
My quick question was regarding the health vision. Just wondering what the status of the work on the health vertical team is. And sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but I noticed that vision was a draft.
Yeah, you are jumping ahead a little, so we will get to that. Is that okay, Emily? You're muted, but I'm assuming you're good, unless you unmute again.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anything else, Aura, from the team membership?
No, looks like we can keep moving here.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do now is each of the teacher leaders on the team are going to kind of, they each have a content area that they focus on, but rather than talking like content by content, we wanted to kind of bring to life a little bit more of how we focus on making all of this happen. And so each of them is going to speak to kind of one of these areas of focus to help, again, try to get you all to have a little bit more of an illustrative sense of what this is all looking like. So Brooke's going to kick us off with talking about the work we're doing to create this vertical coherence and make sure that teachers are provided with high quality materials to do their job. So Brooke, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. Thank you. I'm going to focus on a few ways that we have deepened our core instruction across the district. Since the launch of the Portland Promise, we've engaged in work that allows us to pull back and take a bird's eye view of content curriculum from the district level. Having teacher leaders come out of the classroom to do this work has allowed us, the teacher leaders, to work from a place of knowing and advocating for our peers. Some of the initial work that we needed to do is to gain a sense of the vertical progression of learning from pre-K to 12th grade in all of our content areas. And having no content area experts at the district level, the work had been left to buildings and individual teachers to try to figure out, and that created inequitable access to high quality curriculum and instruction across the district. Developing our content visions through the vertical teams was an important first step because that vision provides the aspirational goals for teaching and learning in our classrooms based on current research. And as Malia had mentioned, the vertical teams do have representation from all schools at all grade levels. And they are really the folks that we're not individuals running all these ideas about content. We work with representatives from every building. So teachers are involved in the process, and those vertical team members are bringing it back, for example, in science, back to their science departments. And so there's a lot of input on any of the decisions that we're making as we're moving this work forward. At the launch of the Promise, science was being taught in some schools and in some classrooms if we're thinking about the elementary landscape. So it was not universal that science was being taught in every classroom, in every school. And some of the barriers to that were that teachers didn't have enough time in the daily schedule. There wasn't a block that was for content, and they did not have time for preparing to be able to teach science. Most elementary teachers, being generalists, don't have deep science backgrounds like our middle and high school teachers tend to do. And they certainly didn't have the resources and materials to teach science aligned to the next generation science standards. And so that was something that we needed to address. When I looked to, when we started to look at the middle and high school, we didn't have a sense of coherence of what was being taught. We didn't have anyone looking at the big picture, like what's being taught where. And then that led to redundancies where plate tectonics might be taught multiple times and some topics not at all, because there was no one looking at that from that pulled back view. At the middle and high school levels, like I said, teachers are trained in the content, but pedagogy is always changing. And so I started my teaching career 26 years ago. It is a very different landscape now than it was then. And so our vision is based on current research and pedagogy, where we want in the area of science, students grappling with really compelling and puzzling phenomena. They're presented with an image or a scenario, and they're trying to make sense of it. And we're turning the learning over to the students in a way that we may not have in the past. And we're allowing them to figure it out and lead the learning through discourse with each other, experiential and hands-on activities, getting outside on field work. And these are things that can be new for teachers. So knowing that we needed to provide the appropriate professional development in order to prepare them to work with their students in that way was really important. Acknowledging that our teachers are professionals, no doubt about it. They are extraordinary, and we need to honor the immense work they're doing and make sure we're providing them with the resources and materials they need to do that work. And so one area where I've been advocating for materials, and if Mickey were here, she would remember going on tours of labs with me, is needing to upgrade our middle and high school science labs and bring them into the 21st century. We've started that process. We were able to get all middle and high schools new microscopes last year. We're on track to get new hot plates. We've gotten some more lab benches and stools, and they don't sound like super sexy items, but they're really integral tools and equipment in order to teach and prepare our students to be scientists. We have been, there are some blessings, I guess, from the pandemic, and we've been able to leverage federal funding in order to purchase a lot of these resources and materials. And so I was speaking to the fact that elementary did not have a comprehensive district-wide set of curricular materials, and I am pleased to say that we are poised to roll out 3 units of science per grade level, K through 5, in life science, earth science, and physical science. And we know that there are a lot of demands on the elementary teacher's time. And so this year it was optional to roll out one of those science units. And I think it speaks to the willingness of our teachers to dive in and try new things and work with new materials, that we have over 60% of classrooms that could be taking on a physical science unit are taking on a physical science unit, and it's only January. So I'm really excited about how we've looked at the pre-K-12 scope and sequence, the fact that we have prepared ourselves to launch these science units that are going to prepare our students for the middle and high school experience that we've had in place for a really long time. And there's work to be done there too, for sure. But starting a student with a comprehensive science at 6th grade puts them at a great disadvantage. So being able to start back in pre-K, and I haven't spoken to pre-K as much because in the pre-K for me curriculum, there is already science. So our youngest learners are experiencing science as part of their curriculum already. And I just want to leave one shared experience that we were able to roll out last year in the 3rd grade. All our 3rd graders across the district raised salmon to be released into they were released into the Little River. Eventually they will be released into the Presumpscot River. There were some hatchery issues, and there will be again this year. But the really exciting thing to note is that students in their schools this year have been asking their teachers, when are we going to raise the salmon? When are the salmon coming? And we just got word from the folks at the hatchery. They had done a survey of the Little River and found 30 young fish that they attribute to the salmon program. So the fish that the students raised and put in the river are still there and are helping to restore that river. And ultimately, we hope to help restore the Presumpscot River. And students across our district, all 3rd graders from here on, will have that shared opportunity. And that's just one example of the really powerful things that we can do when we have a chance to pull back and look and really center equity in our students at the heart of what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Brooke. I love that. I actually didn't know that about the impact that the salmon.
It's hot off the press. We just found out like a week ago.
That's incredible. I mean, that's amazing to give students the agency to have that big of an impact already in elementary school. I'm going to have everyone kind of highlight these key points before pausing again, just looking at our time and what everything we want to get through. So thank you, Brooke. I'm going to pass it off to Katie Westnut right now, who's going to talk about the next kind of focus of all this work as it's been evolving, which is really around doing this kind of curriculum and instructional work in an interdisciplinary and experiential way. So Katie, you want to speak to that?
Yes, and I'll be as quick as possible because Malia knows that I could speak for hours on this slide. So it's so nice to be here with you and be in conversation with each of you. So kind of how Brooke was talking about the what, I'm talking about the how and that focus on the competency so that we have equitable instructional practices, and the areas of focus are interdisciplinary and experiential learning. And we know that this kind of learning, studies are just they're just pouring out that shows that how much interdisciplinary learning and experiential learning really boost engagement, and more engagement is seen as an indicator of academic success. And so just addressing this first part that increases coherence and connection and relevance of curriculum for our students, I just want you to imagine this metaphor of trees in a forest and how the current culturally dominant model really says that almost as if every tree is a subject area, like this is math, this is English, this is social studies, and they're all completely siloed. And the way the model has been, it's almost as if they're siloed all the way into the ground. But what we're learning, what we know and what we're learning even more about is that the root system under these trees is extensive, elaborate, and very sophisticated communication system. And then that's kind of like in interdisciplinary learning. So while we have respective subject areas, they are all completely, the reality is that they've always been connected, and they were never separate, and how to really integrate them together in our high quality curriculum, which makes more sense to students and increases the engagement. And then just over here on the right, you'll see the experiential learning model. I'm happy to talk about this at any point longer, but what's important about it is that with experiential learning, you really start with a direct experience, and that the quality of it is feeling, versus on the polar opposite is the thinking, which is when abstract conceptualization happens. And why this is important is because it really values different ways of knowing and students' lived experiences, which we all know is a part of culturally responsive pedagogy. So it really opens it up to more learners. And then both interdisciplinary and experiential learning provide just abundant opportunities for SEL and for social emotional learning growth. And so while we can have a focused and direct curriculum for SEL, it's really experiential learning that gives us like the practice area. And the studies show that it increases pro-social behavior, empathy, developing interpersonal skills, which are all critical for students going out into the workplace. And then I just want to touch base on just the practical, like what have we been doing? And so currently, what we're trying to do is offer district-wide equitable fieldwork. And Brooke was touching on this with the salmon. So this fall, all third graders had the opportunity to go to the Penobscot River and really experience for themselves to feel the ways water moves around and before and after a dam, as well as the flora and fauna. And likewise, in a month, all kindergartners will be maple sugaring and be going to the Paths Sugar House. And get to have that. And I think and then next year we'll roll out first, second, and fourth, and fifth. And what's so powerful is this creates a shared narrative that is equitable. So as students even move schools, there's this commonality that all students in our district have had these meaningful and integrated experiences, which again, the studies show that that's what actually narrows the achievement gap. When these are woven into the daily curriculum. And then lastly, you'll see just a little note about environmental literacy and the future of green careers. And this team knows that I'm quite passionate about this because it's really looking at what are the tools and skills that our students need to be able to live in a society in 2050 and 2100 or 2100, I guess that's the same. But really taking a sense of the future so that our students are prepared to go into the world. And I just want you to notice that in the bottom, there's a little link that says research and knowledge building document. And that's a slide deck that just goes into more depth about what each of these areas are and the research that supports what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate that glimpse into this kind of piece of what we've been focused on. And so Fiona's going to talk a little bit more about teacher collaboration. This hooks on to the question, Julianne, you asked earlier. So like we mentioned, we have this big focus in terms of the way we go about building this work, which is collaborative and lifting up teacher voice. So give it to you, Fiona.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Glad to be with you this evening and getting to share about a topic that really is near and dear to my heart, which is the kind of relationship building that is necessary to create really, really quality curriculum, particularly when you're talking about curriculum that is representing or attempting to represent the experiences of all communities in what we now call the United States and the world. So I'm the social studies vertical team leader, and Malia described a little bit about what vertical content teams do, and I'm going to kind of elaborate about the social studies team to give you a sense of how these teams really function as relationship nurturers between schools. It's like a cross-pollinating place where teachers get to meet one another across buildings, across grade levels, and all across the district. I'll say that in my 17 years, I think, where I'm at now in the Portland Public Schools, there really have been scant opportunities for teachers to come together in this collaborative way across buildings and grade levels. So these teams are really critical for moving us out of this kind of every school is an island doing its own thing and into a coherent district. And that is such a important move for so many reasons, not the least of which is our students are moving all the time. So teachers in the past have historically stayed in one building for the majority of their career. And students had too at a different time, but that's not true anymore. Students are moving all over the city, all through schools. And so when teachers aren't talking to one another and don't have the opportunity to collaborate, the people who suffer most are the students. So on the social studies vertical content team, we have representation from all buildings and all grade levels. And we are one of the older vertical teams. We started in 2019. And the social studies work has multiple components. One is to align social studies curriculum pre-K-12. So that alone is a monstrous task because social studies curriculum had essentially zero attention for 20 to 25 plus years until I started this role part-time and now full-time. And simultaneously, we were becoming aware that in order to do the equity work that Portland has become so committed to, we really needed to be following state law. And state law requires students to learn about Wabanaki studies. In the law, it's Maine Native Americans, but I prefer, and as do most Wabanaki people, to not be called Maine Native Americans, as it has a sort of possessive connotation. So you'll hear me call it the Wabanaki Studies Law. That law was passed in 2001, requiring that all students learn this important information and content about the histories, cultures, and contemporary realities of the nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. But it has not happened. And in seeking to deepen our commitment to equity as a district, we have centered being the first district to actually follow that 2001 law. We've launched this work at the elementary level as recently as last week, and you'll get to hear more in more detail at a full board meeting in a few weeks about all of that. But that work came directly from collaboration with teachers and with representatives and advisors from the nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. So that's the Passamaquoddy Nation, the Penobscot Nation, Maliseet, also called Woolastug, across the border nation, and the Mi'kmaq Nation. And we have an advisory group of 13 representatives representing all of the communities I just mentioned, who have really guided this work since the beginning. And so because of having a teacher in this role, of the social studies leadership and the vertical team and these advisories, you can see how it fosters this cross-cultural collaboration so that there's the opportunity to really deeply engage with the community that the curriculum is seeking to represent, while also engaging with the educators who will be teaching it. And without a sort of district level view to kind of be able to foster and nurture those relationships, I think it would be pretty well impossible for that work to have happened at this large of a scale. So the vertical content team has worked on Wabanaki Studies curriculum. That's one subcommittee. Another subcommittee is working on Black history with an emphasis on local Black history. That work is also supported by an advisory that includes Black educators from the Portland Public Schools, as well as community partners and advisors, including now the Speaker of the House, Rachel Talbot Ross. The big picture subcommittee oversees kind of making a coherent home for all of this, because we all know that social studies is not just Wabanaki studies and Black history. Those have been two long neglected parts of social studies curriculum, hence the emphasis on them. But social studies in and of itself consists of many, many different areas: economics and civics and government and history and on and on. So teachers have been working on all three of those subcommittees in collaboration with these advisory groups that I mentioned, along with some dedicated consultants. So some people who are functioning as advisors, and those groups tend to meet 4 or so times a year. There are a few members of each group that actually work really regularly with us and sit on all of the subcommittee meetings. So that includes Star Kelly, who's formerly of the Abbey Museum, a national leader in decolonization work; Nolan Altvader, who is taken Star's position at the Abbey Museum. And Nolan is himself Passamaquoddy. And Star is Indigenous, not from a Wabanaki community, but she is a graduate of the Portland Public Schools. And also 3 consultants who work on the Black history curriculum, including Dr. Larissa Malone, who is faculty of education at USM, Dustin Ward, founder of It Is Time, a racial justice and equity organization, and Uma Mohammed, who is a graduate of the Portland Schools, former president of the BSU, current Bowdoin student. So Uma is an example of a student who has been involved in this vertical content team work since she was a sophomore in high school and has continued that work into her college career. So these kinds of collaborative structures that allow community partnership and with teachers, I think it's the work I feel the most proud of over the last 5 years, because this is the beating heart of what it is to serve your community, is to be nurturing these relationships that really foster deep learning and deep understanding. And I can't think of a more important use of teacher leadership time than to be bringing all of these partners to the table so that we can learn from each other, understand each other better, and really truly have a curriculum that represents the students who are in our classroom. And then I'll also see that one form of teacher leadership lends itself to other forms of teacher leadership. So from this vertical team, there have grown many other leadership opportunities. Currently, there are 7 educators who are working on writing the curriculum for Wabanaki Studies and for Black history. And these are amazing educators who otherwise their amazing work would be limited to their own building. And that's a wonderful thing to have amazing educators in an individual building. But it's even better if we can elevate that work and have systems for it to be shared more widely. And then there are other revision opportunities or other collaboration and engagement opportunities for teachers to work to revise curriculum. So this is curriculum that it's teacher made and it's teacher revised. And there's really an intricate multi-layered process to ensure that there's community involvement and teacher collaboration. And all of that kind of starts at the hub of the vertical content team. Malia, did you want me to mention community partners? I know we're a little short on time.
Let's keep rolling for now, Fiona, given the time, but if that comes up, we can come back to it. So thank you. And one thing I just thought, is it about 50 educators on the vertical team?
I think at its high point, it was about 50. It might be more like 45 this year, but something like that.
Yeah, I was just trying to help give people a sense of that scale. So awesome. Thank you so much, Fiona. Appreciate that perspective. And obviously, we're all super proud of these structures and how we're going about both what the work is and how we're going about it. So Priya is going to talk now a little bit about the focus we have on this embedded PD. So not kind of doing these one and done big professional developments, but thinking about how adults learn best, and then really investing in coaching so that educators are working side by side to improve practice and help kids get better outcomes. So Priya.
All right, thank you. I'm excited to talk about our emphasis on embedded professional development and how coaches, whether math, literacy, or language, can help operationalize that for our teachers. As you might know, a typical model of PD might include a one-off workshop with an outside vendor who presents a cool idea or a new technology and then leaves. Research on adult learning shows that if teachers are not engaged in a learning cycle with time and support, then what they've learned in one PD likely won't stick and instructional practice does not change. As a teacher, I myself had experienced many of these PD sessions over the years and did not want to replicate this model. We knew we wanted professional development for teachers to be relevant to their current and future classroom contexts. We wanted teacher teams to be able to practice new ideas and analyze them over time in a supportive community. Teachers themselves wanted to unpack units, look at student work, and analyze that data. We knew that with so many new teachers and second career teachers that we would need to differentiate that PD to make the time useful for each professional. And finally, we knew that growing capacity for teacher leadership within those learning teams was crucial, not only for ensuring that the work would continue and deepen, but also for meeting the Portland Promise goal to promote talent development and attract and retain skilled staff. As a coach, I designed my work for each school in concert with their school success plans. Multiple schools this year are working, for example, on how to differentiate lessons on a daily and weekly basis for all different types of students. Teacher PLCs, PLGs, professional learning teams develop plans, read articles, observe each other with an eye to these goals. In those buildings, I ensure that the language that I use with teachers is the same as what they are also working on as teams. I support them, I collaborate with them, and I respond to the specific needs in their classroom. This might mean helping to devise a graphic organizer for a lesson, or helping a teacher unpack a unit, unpack language and content objectives for a classroom, or even writing different versions of an assessment for different language proficiencies in the classroom. Our language coach, Anne-Marie Orth, for her, it meant visiting a new middle school language classroom to talk about how to run a stations activity or how to develop a choice board on Padlet. As a coach, I strive to amplify the goals that the school has set for themselves, and even more importantly, that an individual teacher has set for their own work. By design, coaches are a daily embedded support that can make an instructional program actually operational and hopefully transformative across our district. We also frequently use data to help make decisions. This could involve looking at a daily cool down that the students have completed with an individual teacher to determine where to go next in tomorrow's lesson, or looking at the progress a group of students have made over a semester to decide what next course is best for them, or looking at a diagnostic assessment to determine what prerequisite knowledge needs to be strengthened for a specific unit. These are all data meetings I've had in the last 2 weeks alone, and I know every coach could give their own examples. As a coach, I know changing instructional practice does not happen if I'm not side by side with teachers in the classroom, listening and talking with students, looking at assessment, and debriefing in the moment or right after class so that the teacher feels supported, and the feedback can be timely and immediately helpful. Just as one-off Wednesday workshops are not helpful, neither is a one-off coaching observation without a cycle of conversation, ideas, and support. Most coaches also teach an intervention or an enrichment block. And for me, that time serves as a place to implement ideas, connect with students, understand a school's context, and most importantly, remember why I entered the profession in the first place. Thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions about coaching.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Priya. So I think, Jesse, if you can kind of sum up where we're at, and this a little bit speaks to Emily's question, then we might pause here before we then get into the resource part of the conversation.
Great. Thanks everyone for sharing all of that. It was really inspiring. So this slide sort of sums up the incredible work that this team and others have done to coordinate so many educators across the district towards these shared meaningful goals and priorities. So you'll see each content area has a vertical team that was established in the past and then has a vision aligned to that. And then from that vertical team and that vision, we chose aligned materials to support the vision and support educators. And so I just want to sort of pause here, see if people have any questions. In terms of answering the question about health, Emily, so we currently have a draft vision. We're still, I'm actually getting some feedback on it from educators tomorrow. And we have a couple other groups that are going to weigh in. But then the hope is to look at a couple curriculum that are aligned to that vision after we kind of finalize that vision, and possibly pilot a curriculum 6 through 12 next year. So we have a couple that are chosen that we think might meet our criteria, but we kind of have to go through a process of evaluating it based on the criteria, which is aligned to our vision. So that's kind of a good example of how this process goes. Each year we look at those visions and we evaluate. Well, let me pause, see if there's any other questions.
Jesse, one thing I wanted to mention, just so folks know, as a team, we talked a little bit about this, but we do have a few other kind of vertical teams, just so people are aware, in terms of computer science, which is started as a subcomponent of science or connected to science with Brooke, and now is led by Courtney Graffius, as well as a SEL one. And then we've been trying to get a arts team going for a while. And I think our goal this year is that we're starting with a kind of a report of the current state that could then be something that a vertical team launches with in terms of getting that going next year. And am I missing any others, Jesse?
Environmental literacy.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yep. Language. And experiential learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and language, of course. Whoops, yeah. We have to put that on there. Yeah. Okay. So Jesse, you were saying we'd pause here for questions.
Yeah.
Or are you going to run that, or do you want me to look for if folks have any questions?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I don't see anybody, but Julianne. And then Marla. Yeah, go ahead, Julianne.
Thank you. Wow, guys, you work hard, you work long hours, and this is great planning. This is awesome planning. And I commend you because of the way you're going at it from scratch, and it's taking time. You can see those dates, but it's worth it. I had a couple little questions just because when I've been visiting teachers, I'm hearing we don't get to talk to people, or we don't get coaching, and you get all sorts of views when you talk to different groups of people. And on the teacher collaboration, you said there were 45 people in each one of those vertical groups.
That was the social studies. I think they really vary by content area, as well as, frankly, by year. So it's kind of ebbing and flowing.
So 10 to 50, 10 to 20.
Yeah, 10 to, yeah, I think that would be the range.
And I'm glad to hear something going on about civics. That's been a long thing that's been pulled out of social studies and really needs to get back into it. Okay, so one of the things that the interdisciplinary piece picked it up, and I'm a science teacher, so I'm going to pull these things in, and that is that language partnership within the, what your work at K-5 is great because you've got the generalists going on. In the K-5, they can then see some of that cross language, math language, which you may have issues with people who do not speak English, the translations of size and et cetera, but not necessarily. But language and math language and science language and of various sorts that would hope would be aware of it, because as they approach into middle school and high school, they don't have to know everything at fifth grade, but these terms need to be there. So that's a piece that I would love to see. Even it may be. I mean, you can't tell me everything in 1 hour about all you do. And one of these days, I would love to meet with each and every one of you because I think you're doing awesome work. And I guess there's one other thing. And Pri, you brought up about the embedded work and all. And my question there has to do with, again, how many teachers are actually open to that? Do you depend upon and this, anyone can answer this, Pri doesn't have to answer this, but in your experience, are the teachers open to it? Are there a select number of teachers that are open to it? That's always is an issue with any kind of newness. And moving out of the track that you've been used to, or are there serious discussions with some, invited type pieces and how you're working with that? Because and I know not everybody buys into everything and you all are working incredibly hard to get a lot of good stuff done, and the reaction, I think, I was in a car in the December meeting where you were talking about RTI and the like, Malia, but my comment is how many teachers are putting the brakes on, and Malia, the time situation is huge. What's giving in what places? So those are the kinds of, I'm not asking you to answer these questions, but to somehow pull these things out and say, where do we have to go? I'm very progressive with education. People don't realize that, but I'm incredibly progressive with education. And so I would love to hear where you stand on some of these places too. There is the money and the items of getting specific materials and all, but how else can you really develop these programs and this effort? That's my only concern. It's because you've worked so hard and people are working hard, and I'll be quiet because I could talk forever about school and education and stuff. So my thought, and I would hope, as you go through it, maybe when I meet with you, you can tell me what you think.
Yeah, I was going to say that we should definitely pick up on this, Julianne, when we have our one-on-one. I don't know, Pri, if you wanted to give a quick kind of reflection on that for now, but definitely, Julianne, I would love to dig in more when we get that chance to meet.
I think there's a lot that I could say there. I think what I'd love to emphasize for tonight is this idea of teams. And really emphasizing that collaboration. So I've tried to focus, and I know this is true as well for the Wabanaki units, where, some of that work has been optional, but because we've built these teams that are moving forward and progressing and adopting these exciting new pieces together, and it's clear that the teachers are bought in and they're loving it, they're signing up. And that has convinced more and more people to sign up. And I would say that has been true with many of the coaching experiences as well. I can't speak to, I'm going to use the I first person. I'll speak for myself. That has worked for me, that, tagging into groups of teachers who are wanting to be there, who are wanting to improve our practice, and, providing some practical support and real assistance and being present in the room has made it a positive. And so I have not had resistance. And I believe, some of the other groups, I think maybe Brooke, you can talk about, the work that you did last summer with the group that was optional, and now so many educators are signing on, because we have amazing educators who see the opportunities that are available and want that for our kids, and we see that they're buying it. So I guess that's the short answer for tonight. Maybe Brooke, you can add on, or Fiona.
I know they could. I am aware of our time, and we still have not a small amount of content to get through.
Okay, and I want to make sure Dialect gets to ask a question. And then, okay.
But thank you, Priya, for that. So maybe, or if we can hear, and Julianne, let's keep talking, because there's definitely also times where coaching hasn't landed as well. There's been years where I can talk about that. So I want to be transparent that it's, I think that's very true of Priya's experience, and there's variation. So would be happy to talk about that and kind of how we've been reflecting and growing from that feedback as a team. So Nyla, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for just kind of all over the place today, but I had a couple of questions. Taking me a minute to bring up the... Okay, so I'm wondering, with the professional development or with the focus groups, how, I might have missed this, but how are those groups formed? Are they voluntarily, like when a curriculum or a need is seen? Also, with what I heard from the professional development, it seems like it's really mostly about helping teachers kind of understand their role better, or have more capacity to do some of the things they want with their role, but not necessarily some of those like high value or high end professional development about how to structure the class in terms of like equity. So for me, I'm thinking if we're centering equity, then we're also trying to center like the professional development of helping a teacher understand equity and then teach equity, right? So because I think for me, a lot of people, I feel like, I don't know, I just think it's hard to always say equity, throw out equity, and want to see equity or want to center equity. But equity, you can't just unconsciously center it without really knowing what it actually means for your school system, or even for the students that are in your school. So how is the professional development centering the learning and the continuous learning of that equity that is being thrown out, or is essentially like being prioritized?
Mm-hmm. I can answer the first question, and then I don't know if one of the rest of you wants to hit the second one again. Please just be aware of our time. But I think in terms of the first question, Nyla, for how do we form the teams, it's both a combo of recruitment and an open invitation. And so we for example, we have internal communications where we've put out information about teams. We put out Google surveys and ask people to kind of express interest. So there's this sort of open door, like who's interested and would be willing. And normally we've had to then go about recruiting people to ensure that we have representation. And we're looking at, also just representation as far as identities, schools, grade spans. So that takes some deliberateness on our part to make sure we're kind of forming these teams that bring all these different perspectives to the table. So it's a combo of everybody has access to raise their hand and say they're interested. And we're looking at the compositions of the teams and recruiting through direct relationships with teachers and asking coaches and principals for recommendations as well. And that's for the teacher piece. And then we also have in different teams, sometimes community partners or students or parents that have been involved. And that a little bit depends on the content area. And so those are kind of targeted based on kind of particular interest and expertise. So we've had students who've been on teams because they've written senior kind of papers about the topic. And so then we've, recruited them onto the team. We've had community partners like the health vertical team has a bunch of community partners who, do work in our community connected to all the topics that get taught in health. But would somebody else be willing to take like kind of a quick, I think Nyla's question is a deep question, but just sort of a couple things. There is, Nyla, I think the sort of equity PD that's sort of specifically across the board that we've been doing for years through our equity leaders cohort, where we talk directly about things like implicit bias, privilege, things like that. And then this work is where we try to then help people apply that, because sometimes people are like, okay, conceptually I get that, but like, how does that actually translate into what I'm doing in my English class? And so our emphasis tonight, what we were talking about is that other piece and how we bridge those two things together. But I don't know if anyone wants to speak on that just a little bit more for a second.
Yeah, and I guess to be more clear, it's what I am saying is my understanding is these groups are coming together to decide essentially like what would be prioritized for future curriculum. So if they're doing that and they're trying to center equity, they would then need to at least have kind of like Ms. Natarajan said, not necessarily like one time, development of this work, right? They would need to continuously work or they continuously meet multiple times in different settings in that space. How are they also doing the equity work, right? Like, so in math, how are they working? How are they thinking about equity within the math curriculum and how to address equity and how to incorporate like new programming that would be more inclusive than some of the things that we're doing. So like, how are they innovatively including equity? And then because I heard it in social studies, right? Like they're going to prioritize Wabanaki studies, or they're doing some type of, I think from what I saw, it was like some anti-bias education, and then the like
local Black
facing history and our lives, and I guess local Black history, which I haven't looked at that, so I don't know what that looks like. So yeah, like I'm saying, like how is that incorporated in the other curriculums as well?
Yeah, go ahead, Priya. That's that we are constantly talking about that and pulling that thread through. So yeah, Priya, if you could talk about it.
I think that's a really important question. So I'll just give a few examples of how we center equity. So first of all, when we choose a curriculum, we're thinking about are there diverse representations in that curriculum, not only of life experiences and types of problems, and also extra resources, so that if we need, we need something to pull out for, enrichment or remediation, we have that within the curriculum already provided. We also think about, when I'm in with a teacher and I'm looking at a classroom, I'm careful to think about like bringing up what assets the students have. So it's not primarily about what the students don't know, but what do they know? What can you draw out from each of those students and use that when you're teaching a class? And that's fundamentally about equity, about knowing who our students are and digging deeper than just what's in Infinite Campus under, their demographic information, but what are their stories? What do they know? And how can we bring that to the fore? When we're doing data meetings with teachers, we're not just looking at just the numbers, but what are the stories behind those numbers? And what are the reasons why someone might be struggling in a class? And how can we engage the strengths that they are showing to to help them succeed. And so those are the kinds of things that I do in daily coaching that are, intended to make sure that equity is operationalized. It's real, and it's reflected not only in how students feel about being in math class, but also in student outcome, right? In the results that we're seeing, and moving towards, frankly, a better set of results, right, than we've had in the past. So that's super important for me. And I think that it's, again, dovetailed with what the equity leaders are doing. So I think part of good coaching is about not seeing math coaching or literacy coaching as a separate silo where you go do this coaching, you do this coaching, and then you do your equity coaching or your equity PD. It's all part of helping our students succeed, and helping all of our students succeed. And so those are just a few examples, Nylat, of some examples from my coaching life. But I would love to talk more about that in the future. I know we're running out of time. Is that helpful?
Yeah. I guess for what the view I have is, my biggest thing is that for students to be able to succeed, not necessarily focusing on their like the barriers that they have to achievement, but also, or like focusing on that, but also understanding that they need safe spaces to be able to learn. They need capacity to not have to advocate for their own safety, to not have to protest for their own safety or their own capacity to be in these spaces, or for teachers to have the knowledge to teach them, to understand their identity. So for me, I would rather focus on doing the work with the teachers and getting us to an understanding of equity is this. Equity is anti-racism. Equity is dissecting, decolonizing anti-Blackness. Equity is not, let's get everybody to go on this trip together to see how they can be seen in this trip. So I want to do the deeper work of equity is creating safe spaces where our kids are not exposed to these very harmful systems that they're going to be exposed to outside of our school system. And so that's what I want to be interested in. And that's where I want us to focus in terms of equity, not how can we, incorporate some of the things that we haven't always incorporated, but more of how can we do that deeper work of really creating safe spaces for our kids to learn. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think, it's tricky, right, for us to, in this short bit of time, get as deep as, I think everybody here is in that conversation. And, I hear what you're saying. And I think, obviously the relationship, and to your point about safety is at the foundation. And so tonight's, I don't know if you were here for the beginning, Nylat, but tonight's, conversation was specifically trying to give you a particular update on our curriculum work. So that's why we're talking about that as our focus and lens here. But I wouldn't want the fact that we're trying to be carve out this piece to talk about, to communicate that that's the only way we think about it in a silo. Because I definitely understand what you're saying, or I think I understand what you're expressing and sort of, wanting to see us be doing. So if it's okay, I'm looking at our time. We're technically supposed to wrap in 8 minutes. Is it okay if I continue and we kind of finish the last piece here, and then all right.
Malia, can I say one last thing? You're going to be mad at me.
Yeah, if it's quick.
I just really appreciate what you were saying. And I think at least what it was landing with me as equity, not the performance of equity, but actual real equity that's landing with students. And I think that kind of ties back to the collaboration that I was discussing and Priya had talked about, that fostering relationships between the community and the schools, in my view, is a central part of what will help to grow safe spaces for students. And just appreciate you sharing your perspective.
Thanks, Fiona. So Cindy, is this is the we want to now kind of talk a little bit about beginning to kind of preview where we're headed again with this particular curriculum piece of the huge puzzle. And so, Cindy, do you want to speak a little bit on the literacy work?
Yes. So when I entered Portland schools 23 years ago, my passion for literacy began, and I'm really thankful that I've worked for a school district that has developed me as a teacher to be in a position of advocating and representing our amazing and brilliant teachers across the district. So I just wanted to recognize that our district is cultivating really strong teachers and recognizing that in teacher leadership. As Jesse mentioned, our visions provide us with a really strong guidepost that helps us reference, especially as we're considering our current literacy practices, as well as the quality of the curriculum tools and materials that are provided to teachers. So one example of that is in grades 6 through 8, they're implementing the EL education, and that is ongoing and will continue moving forward. In elementary, a really important pivotal point was in 2018. Alongside the creation of the vision was this other piece of recognition that was happening that was revealed through our student data. There was just this need for explicit phonics instruction. And as a result, a collaborative process began that involved literacy coaches, teachers, and administrators to review and identify curriculum materials that targeted this need. The team identified 2 resources: Lively Letters, which helps students identify letters and their matching sounds, and TC Phonics, which supports students to apply knowledge of the sounds to decode, learn sight words, and develop fluency. The team also identified a 3-year implementation process beginning in 2019. And as we all know, this implementation plan was sharply interrupted by the pandemic. So through a continued collaborative process, literacy coaches and educators identified a critical need to extend phonics instructions to support students with the lost instructional time. This led to expanding the foundational skills instruction to include Hegarty, K-2, which is a program to target phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is a student's ability to blend, segment, manipulate, and isolate sounds. It also led the team to make a decision to implement an early bird assessment, which is a screener, and it screens students for early detection of reading difficulties, including dyslexia. So that was K1 this year, and grade 2 will be next year. The collaborative process continued, and a team selected Lexia Core 5 to be implemented grades 3-5. And this is a program that's an adapted blended learning model, which includes time on an application, which gives teachers a ton of information, which then they provide small group instruction, and then students have independent repeated practice. So this targets and addresses gaps and from learning that was lost, and also that students didn't have that instructional time during the pandemic because it was only 2 days a week until April of 2021, as well as support structure analysis of words and help students build vocabulary knowledge. So the results from current data, Malia, can you go to the next slide, shine a light on some emerging bright spots. So through the use of Lexia Core 5, there has been an increase in the percentage of students working at or above grade level material on the foundational skills. So you can see across the district, the beginning of the year, we started at 18%, and now we're at 32%. And then looking at the results of first graders on the early bird, non-word reading is a really important subtest that shows how students can identify letter sounds and their ability to decode through continuous phonication. And you can see there was an increase of students at benchmark from 37% to 57% from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year benchmark. And that's just one subtest, but it's pretty awesome. And while this data provides a glimmer of the potential and the shifts towards alignment to the science of reading research to support these shifts from the work of Emily Hanford, if you've listened to the Sold the Story podcast, the National Association of Educational Progress data across our country, and then Nancy Young's Reading Ladder, which highlights that 30% of students will learn to read easily or a broad array of reading instruction or from a broad array of reading instruction. If reading proficiency remains stagnant, there, it indicates that the 65% of students who require explicit systematic instruction are not receiving the instructional support that they need to support vital reading, to acquire vital reading skills to become proficient readers. So we're constantly looking at our reading proficiency and seeing if it is above that 35 to 40%. And you can see that we have shifted a little bit above that, but we need to continually watch that and see where we're at. Teachers have also provided clear feedback through surveys and conversation and grade level meetings with literacy coaches and in small groups where they've met with the academic team. They have shared a sense of overwhelm that could be reduced if they had one comprehensive foundational skills curriculum that would streamline instruction for K-2 teachers and students. Teachers are also asking for streamlined assessments embedded within instructional materials. So we're really listening to teachers' voices and throughout this process. So across the district, we've begun engaging in dialogue with principals, teachers, and literacy coaches to consider all that has been revealed about foundational skills, as well as the need for knowledge building through an interdisciplinary approach where literacy skills are blended and woven across instructional content areas. This was highlighted by my colleagues and has led us to think about an approach to this important integration. Together, we've come to a place of understanding that to accomplish this meaningful integration, we could provide an interdisciplinary literacy block. So that would be one block. And then another block to provide explicit literacy instruction, which we would call the literacy block. And then also to address phonics, phonemic awareness, decoding, and fluency in a foundational skills block. So those are three different really important instructional times. And so our school day is what it is. And it's really something that we've been just really grappling with because we know all these things are critical and important. And so it's led us to this process that is happening right now, where we're working across the district to consider high quality curricular materials and what we have to support teachers with those three blocks. As Brooke and Fiona shared, materials for the interdisciplinary block have been identified or are being developed through a collaborative process, and there is an ongoing plan to implement those. However, for the literacy and foundational skills block, we are currently engaging in discussions with administrators, literacy coaches, and are looking how we can include teachers in the process as it continues to unfold, as well as communicate, as well as community members. And while it's really too early to tag any specific resource, the process of the team is beginning to review what materials do exist that align with our vision, have a culturally responsive responsibility, and are aligned to standards, and that also will integrate alongside the interdisciplinary block well. And so this is just the very beginning of the process, and we still need feedback from teachers and other stakeholders. Our team felt it was really important to highlight that an investment in the literacy is to support comprehensive instruction of foundational skills and to support explicit instruction during the literacy block will be present in this upcoming budget request or proposal.
Awesome. Thank you, Cindy. And so then on that, where we want to kind of wrap up is around the budget component. Because again, I know some of you hopped on later, but our objectives tonight were really to help ground you all in kind of where we've been historically around specifically our kind of curriculum work, and then to give you a sense of both how we're going about it and then what resources we're investing to help ground you all in terms of what we're trying to kind of continue to maintain, to deepen, and then the holes that we still need to fill. So Gail, will you give us a quick, and I know we're at time, so, and I know Cindy, you're feeling rushed, but if you can give us kind of quick orientation to this, that would be awesome.
Sure. This slide's intended to highlight how we're funding the initiatives in the core content areas and other domains that support the core. You can see across the top, we have those content areas, and along the side in the first 3 rows, how we are funding curricular materials and teacher support. And below that, you have a look at the per pupil investment based on our current enrollment of 6,600 students. And in yellow, highlighting how much of that is committed with our local budget, and the final row is comparing that to last year. And so the headline is that we have been funding more out of grants than we do out of our local budget. Over half of the investment is in grants. And that there are some content areas that we've been working at for a while, like math, that's sort of stabilizing. And so that per pupil investment of about $45 is the ongoing cost of having high quality materials and replacing consumables and lost materials annually. There are some domains where we are investing less locally. And in fact, experiential learning is fully funded at this time by grants. So there's a 0 per pupil investment at the local level in experiential learning. Over the past, we have leveraged, as someone said before, the ESSER funds to be able to make some one-time purchases. And we did in this current budget, we were able to make moves to enhance the per pupil to cover the ongoing costs of curriculum, for example, in social studies and science, but it's not quite sufficient or at the level where it needs to be.
Thanks, Gail. Are you good on that?
Yeah.
Very good at summarizing a gigantic amount of work and information quickly there. So I think where we kind of wanted to close out with you all is around just like looking forward, again, given our objectives for this evening. So what we're hoping to do when we look at kind of all this work we've been building since the launch of the Portland Promise, which we articulated to you this evening, is to stay the course and continue deepening implementation with the pieces that are well underway. There are places where we have to continue to build out. So science in particular is one of those places where we've started the investment. We have things and are rolling them, but there are ongoing components that we want to keep resourcing to continue that progress. And then there's a couple key areas that are not yet funded. So we see these as investment areas in this coming budget cycle, and specifically they're around ELA that Cindy spoke to, as well as the health curriculum piece. And I do want to note that, as Gail mentioned, part of the reason I think there's many reasons why we're using grants a lot of the time to fund curriculum resources. One, you heard me say we started with such a minimal investment, so it feels like a lot of adding. We're aware of that. Also, when we're purchasing materials and stuff, it can be strategic to leverage grants because for the sort of upfront, more costly kind of purchase, and then try to bring the recurring costs into local. And so we're looking at that, but also, feel like it's important that the local budget is supporting the basic kind of tools that teachers need. And then not going to get into this evening, but just flagging for you all again, as this is sort of planting seeds and building context as we head into the budget, that we do have several critical roles that are currently grant funded where the grants are going away or getting reduced significantly. And so I've got those named here. Cindy's position, who you just heard from, our only literacy person for the district, as far as like having that bird's eye view. Our mobile makerspace teacher, who's doing incredible work. And we have obviously the whole mobile makerspace. And then the director of secondary access and outcomes, Pamela Atunu, who you may have remember in terms of some presentations she's done, as well as some sort of new needs that will surface in these conversations. So again, we weren't intending to get deep into that tonight, but I just was trying to give you a full view of that.
Thank you so much. Sorry, were you saying more thing?
No, I personally have a super hard stop at 7:20. And I don't know if others were planning to hop off at 7.
Yeah, I want to let everybody go. I just wanted to say briefly, thank you so much. And just even quickly for 1 minute to share anecdotally, I have a third grader, it's just so wonderful to be able to see across the district this work in the time frame over the years. But I was like, oh my gosh, how lucky am I to have a child that's had lively letters. And I think I shared with Jessie at a meeting in the past that like I was concerned about her learning to read over, the pandemic. And so like I saw that, the excitement she had with that. She's been able to do Wabanaki studies and go to the Presumpscot River. And what was the other piece that you all talked about? Just like she's talking about earth science and like coming home with this excitement and engagement. And so just seeing the interdisciplinary work across the subject. So I just feel so excited to know that kids are going to be getting this across the district, but just feel really happy to have the context of my kid coming home and telling me about all this work. So thank you to be able to see it in action for my own child, and knowing that kids are going to be getting access is really, really exciting. So thank you, everybody. But I want to respect everybody's time. And then Erin and Malia, do you think we could just do the minutes next time? Do the 2? Yeah. Okay, great. I appreciate everyone so much. Our next meeting is February 28th. And if anybody member could just throw out a that we're gonna what am I saying? To say
Move that we adjourn.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Move that we are going to adjourn. Thank you for that, Julianne. You saved me. My words were just not coming.
Okay.
Okay. And a second from anyone? Second.
Second.
Thanks, Nyla. Okay, all in favor of adjourning. I appreciate staff so much. Thank you, everybody.
I'm raising my hand.
Okay. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.